There are sentences that sound ordinary but carry a hidden purpose. They are not spoken to create understanding. They are spoken to create confusion. They are not spoken to solve a problem. They are spoken to transfer responsibility. And they are not spoken because you are weak. They are spoken because someone believes your kindness, patience, and willingness to understand can be used against you. But today, that changes. Today, you will learn to recognize 10 statements commonly used by people with strong narcissistic or manipulative traits. You will understand what may be hiding behind those words, why those statements affect your emotions, and how to protect your peace without becoming bitter. This message is not about labeling every difficult person. It is about developing discernment. It is about recognizing repeated patterns. It is about refusing to surrender your identity simply because someone speaks with confidence, because a confident lie is still a lie. A repeated accusation is still not your identity. And someone else's refusal to take responsibility does not make you responsible for everything. Words are not always used to communicate truth. Sometimes they are used to control perception, redirect responsibility, and weaken another person's confidence. That is why you must learn to listen beyond the sentence. Do not only ask, "What did this person say?" Ask, "What is this statement trying to make me believe about myself?" A manipulative person may speak with confidence, but confidence is not evidence. They may repeat a false version of events until you begin doubting what you saw, what you heard, and what you experienced. They may deny their actions, minimize your feelings, or present themselves as the victim whenever you raise a concern. Over time, you may become so focused on defending yourself that you forget to examine their behavior. That is how perception control works. It does not always begin with obvious cruelty. It may begin with small corrections to your reality. You say, "That comment hurt me," and they answer, "You misunderstood." You say, "You promised you would do this." And they respond, "I never promised anything." You say, "I feel ignored." And they reply, "You are always creating problems." Notice what is happening. The conversation is no longer about the original behavior. The attention has been redirected toward your memory, your emotions, your personality, or your supposed flaws. Instead of answering for what they did, they put you on trial for how you reacted. When this pattern happens repeatedly, you may begin asking yourself dangerous questions. Am I too emotional? Am I remembering incorrectly? Am I the real problem? Should I stop speaking up? That uncertainty can make you easier to control, because a person who no longer trusts their own judgment often depends on someone else to define reality for them. You must understand that disagreement is not automatically manipulation. Two people can honestly remember a situation differently. A healthy person may defend their perspective while still respecting yours. They may say, "That was not my intention, but I understand why it affected you." They may ask questions, acknowledge your feelings, and take responsibility for the part they played. Manipulation looks different. It is usually part of a repeated pattern in which one person is never responsible. Your feelings are always dismissed, and every conflict somehow ends with you apologizing for bringing it up. You walk into the conversation seeking clarity, but you leave feeling guilty, confused, and ashamed. That confusion is not something you should ignore. Your emotional response is not perfect proof that manipulation occurred, but it is information. When conversations repeatedly leave you doubting your sanity, fearing honest communication, or feeling responsible for everything, step back and examine the pattern. Do not judge the relationship only by the person's promises. Judge it by the repeated results of their behavior. This is why written records can be helpful. You do not need to document every sentence or turn your life into an investigation. But when important agreements, financial matters, work responsibilities, or repeated boundary violations are involved, writing things down can help you remain grounded. Messages, dates, and personal notes can protect you from being persuaded that events never happened. Trusted relationships are also essential. Manipulation grows stronger in isolation. When you stop speaking to friends, relatives, counselors, or other trustworthy people, you lose access to balanced perspectives. A manipulative person may insist that outsiders will never understand, but healthy support can help you recognize what has become normal inside an unhealthy environment. However, your goal should not be to create an army against the other person. Your goal is clarity. Choose mature people who will not simply agree with everything you say, but who will help you examine the situation honestly. You need support that strengthens your judgment, not support that increases drama. You must also resist the temptation to argue endlessly. When someone is committed to controlling the narrative, presenting more evidence may not produce accountability. You can explain the truth 10 different ways and still be misunderstood by someone who benefits from misunderstanding you. There comes a moment when wisdom must replace repetition. You can say, "That is not how I experienced the situation." You can say, "I am willing to discuss the issue, but I will not continue while my feelings are being mocked." You can say, "We may disagree, but I will not accept being blamed for your choices." These responses are not about dominating the conversation. They are about refusing to surrender your mind. Remember, no person has the authority to define your entire identity through repeated accusations. You should remain open to correction because every human being has blind spots. But correction should lead to greater understanding, not constant humiliation. Healthy accountability identifies behavior and encourages growth. Manipulation attacks your identity and creates dependency. Learn the difference. Do not let someone's tone convince you that they possess the truth. Do not let repetition turn falsehood into fact. Do not allow guilt to replace careful judgment. Listen, reflect, examine your own behavior honestly, and take responsibility when you are wrong. But never carry blame simply because another person refuses to carry their own. Your mind is a sacred responsibility. Protect it with truth, self-awareness, wise counsel, and clear boundaries. When you trust yourself responsibly, not arrogantly but honestly, you become much harder to control. The beginning of freedom is not winning every argument. It is recognizing when an argument is being used to make you abandon what you know, what you value, and who you are. One troubling sentence does not automatically prove that a person has narcissistic personality disorder. This distinction is important because human beings are complex, emotional, and imperfect. Anyone can become defensive during an argument. Anyone can say something selfish, dismissive, or insensitive when they feel threatened, tired, ashamed, or overwhelmed. A single mistake may reveal poor judgment in one moment, but a repeated pattern reveals something deeper about how a person chooses to relate to others. Wisdom does not rush to label people. Wisdom observes behavior over time. You must learn the difference between an occasional unhealthy reaction and a consistent system of manipulation. A person who makes a mistake may calm down, reflect, apologize, and try to behave differently. They may say, "I was wrong. I understand how my words affected you. I will work on this." Their apology may not be perfect, but there is evidence of responsibility and change. A person with a deeply manipulative pattern often responds differently. They deny what happened, blame you for their actions, minimize your feelings, rewrite the conversation, or punish you for raising the issue. Instead of asking, "How can we repair this?" they ask, "How can I escape responsibility while maintaining control?" That pattern matters more than any single phrase. Some people hear a popular psychological term and begin using it against everyone who disappoints them. A selfish friend becomes a narcissist. A strict manager becomes a narcissist. A partner who disagrees becomes a narcissist. But disagreement is not narcissism. Confidence is not narcissism. Setting a boundary is not narcissism. Wanting recognition is not automatically narcissism. Even emotional immaturity does not always equal a personality disorder. Labels can become dangerous when they replace careful thinking. Your goal should not be to win an argument by diagnosing another person. Your goal should be to recognize whether the relationship is healthy, respectful, and emotionally safe. You do not need a clinical label before taking repeated mistreatment seriously. You do not have to prove what someone is before deciding what behavior you will no longer accept. Ask yourself practical questions. Does this person repeatedly refuse accountability? Do they constantly demand admiration while ignoring your needs? Do they treat your boundaries as personal attacks? Do they use guilt, fear, humiliation, or confusion to influence your decisions? Do they show empathy only when it benefits them? Do they apologize but continue the same behavior? Do you regularly leave conversations doubting your memory, value, or sanity? One answer may not reveal everything, but repeated answers form a pattern. Patterns are powerful because they show you what promises often hide. A person may promise change after every crisis, but if the same behavior returns, the pattern is speaking louder than the apology. A person may claim to respect you, but if they repeatedly mock your emotions, violate your boundaries, and blame you for their choices, their behavior is communicating the truth. Do not become so focused on the label that you ignore the lesson. You are not responsible for becoming someone's psychologist. You are not required to analyze every childhood wound, hidden insecurity, or emotional motive behind their behavior. Understanding someone's pain can create compassion, but compassion must never become permission for continued harm. A difficult past may explain behavior, but it does not excuse repeated mistreatment. You can understand why someone became controlling and still refused to be controlled. You can recognize their insecurity and still protect your dignity. You can feel compassion for their wounds without volunteering to become the place where those wounds are repeatedly expressed through cruelty. This is emotional maturity, seeing the full humanity of another person without surrendering your own. It is also important to examine yourself honestly. Sometimes we focus so intensely on another person's behavior that we avoid evaluating our own. Healthy discernment requires humility. Ask whether you communicated clearly, whether you reacted impulsively, whether you misunderstood something, or whether you also need to apologize. But self-reflection must not become self-erasure. Taking responsibility for your mistakes does not mean accepting responsibility for everything. You can say, "I should not have raised my voice," while also saying, "Your dishonesty is still unacceptable." You can correct your tone without abandoning the truth. You can acknowledge your weakness without allowing someone to use it as a distraction from their repeated behavior. A healthy relationship allows both people to be accountable. An unhealthy relationship demands that one person carry all the blame while the other remains permanently innocent. So do not rush to diagnose, observe, document important incidents when necessary. Speak with trustworthy people who can offer a balanced perspective. Seek qualified professional guidance when the situation is affecting your emotional health, safety, or ability to function. Most importantly, trust consistent evidence. Words can confuse you. Charm can distract you. Promises can temporarily comfort you. But repeated behavior reveals character. You do not need to hate someone to recognize that their presence is harming you. You do not need to call them a monster before creating distance. You do not need everyone else to agree with your decision before protecting your peace. Focus less on proving what they are and more on deciding who you will become. Become a person who values truth over confusion, responsibility over blame, boundaries over fear, and peace over endless emotional conflict. That is where your power begins. Your greatest protection against manipulation is not anger, revenge, or the ability to argue better. It is emotional clarity. Emotional clarity means knowing what you feel, understanding why you feel it, recognizing what belongs to you, and refusing to carry what belongs to someone else. When you are emotionally clear, another person cannot easily confuse you into abandoning your values. They may still criticize you, accuse you, or attempt to rewrite what happened, but their words will no longer have unlimited authority over your mind. Manipulation survives in confusion. When you are uncertain about your worth, you may accept someone else's judgment as truth. When you are unclear about your boundaries, you may allow repeated disrespect because you do not know when enough is enough. When you constantly doubt your memory, you may depend on the manipulator to explain your own experiences to you. This is why emotional clarity is so powerful. It restores your ability to see, decide, and respond from a place of stability. You must learn to separate feelings from facts without dismissing either one. Your feelings provide information, but they do not always tell the entire story. Feeling guilty does not automatically mean you are guilty. Feeling afraid does not always mean you are in danger, but it may indicate that something deserves closer attention. Feeling confused after every conversation may be a sign that the communication is unhealthy. Emotional maturity allows you to acknowledge your feelings while examining the behavior, context, and repeated pattern. Ask yourself honest questions. What exactly happened? What words were spoken? What boundary was crossed? Did the person accept responsibility, or did they immediately blame you? Was this a single mistake followed by sincere change, or is it part of a repeated cycle? Clarity grows when you stop judging a relationship only by its best moments and begin evaluating its consistent behavior. A manipulative person may attempt to make every situation emotionally complicated. They may introduce unrelated problems, bring up old mistakes, involve other people, or turn your concern into an attack against your character. You begin by discussing one disrespectful comment, but within minutes you are defending your entire life. This is not healthy conflict resolution. It is distraction. Emotional clarity teaches you to return to the original issue. You can calmly say, "We can discuss those concerns separately, but right now we are talking about what happened today." You do not need to follow every accusation into another argument. You do not have to answer 10 new charges simply because someone refuses to address the first one. Clarity also requires you to understand your values. What do you believe healthy communication should look like? What behavior will you no longer accept? What qualities must exist in your closest relationships? If you have never defined your values, you may repeatedly negotiate them under pressure. Your boundaries must be based on principles, not moods. A boundary is not an attempt to control another person. It is a decision about what you will do when certain behavior occurs. You cannot force someone to speak respectfully, but you can end the conversation when disrespect begins. You cannot force someone to tell the truth, but you can stop relying on a person who repeatedly deceives you. You cannot force emotional maturity into another person, but you can decide how much access an emotionally unsafe person has to your life. This is where many people become trapped. They communicate a boundary but never enforce it. They say, "Do not speak to me that way," but remain in the argument for another hour. They say, "I will not accept dishonesty," but repeatedly ignore proven deception. A boundary without action becomes only a request. Manipulative people often study whether your words have consequences. You must also stop believing that calmness means weakness. Some people think strength must be loud, aggressive, and dramatic, but emotional strength is often quiet. It is the ability to pause before responding. It is the discipline to avoid explaining yourself repeatedly. It is the courage to leave a conversation that has become abusive or pointless. It is the wisdom to understand that not every accusation deserves a defense. There are moments when silence is not surrender. Silence can be self-control. Distance can be discernment. Refusing to argue can be evidence that you no longer need another person's agreement to trust your own reality. However, emotional clarity does not mean assuming you are always right. Mature clarity includes humility. You must be willing to recognize your mistakes, listen to respectful criticism, and apologize when your behavior causes harm. The difference is that healthy accountability corrects your actions without destroying your identity. You can say, "I handled that poorly," without accepting the false conclusion, "I am the cause of everything wrong." Keep trusted people in your life. Manipulation becomes stronger in isolation because there is no healthy perspective to challenge it. Speak with wise friends, family members, counselors, or qualified professionals who can help you evaluate patterns without increasing unnecessary conflict. Support does not make you weak. Sometimes another stable perspective helps you recognize what constant pressure has made difficult to see. Remember this, you do not need perfect evidence to take your emotional well-being seriously. You do not need everyone to agree before you establish a boundary. You do not need the person who hurt you to approve your healing. Your life cannot be governed by another person's willingness to understand you. Become clear about who you are. Become clear about what you value. Become clear about what you will accept and what you will walk away from. When clarity enters your mind, confusion loses its throne. When self-respect enters your decisions, manipulation loses its influence. And when you finally trust yourself enough to act on the truth you already recognize, you become difficult to control, not because you have become cold, but because you have become conscious.